Hi, hello, and habari. Welcome back to Module 3. In Module 2, you worked on your problem trees, and we hope you had a good time. We certainly had a good time watching you. In this module, we're going to be focusing on gender equality and social inclusion. But before we get into it, I'd like for us to do a short imagination exercise. Now, most of us have been in a natural disaster, or we know people that have been in natural disasters, or at least we have a close knowledge of natural disasters, and we know how they work. So I'd like you for a moment to draw on your experience and your knowledge to think about people living in the same community and people that are affected by a natural disaster, perhaps a hurricane or typhoon, a tropical storm, a tropical cyclone, like you see in the picture here. Now, you probably have observed that not everybody in the community is affected by disaster events in the same way. What are some of the factors that cause some people in the community to suffer more harm than others? You've probably also noticed that some people recover more quickly from disasters than others. So what is the difference between someone that recovers quickly and someone that recovers not so quickly? What are some of the factors that affect the harm that people feel or the rate at which they recover? Now, I think that most of us will agree that there are non-climate factors that affect the harm that people experience from climate shocks and climate stresses, and which also affect their ability to recover from shocks and stresses. In this module, we're going to be focusing on these dynamics and some of the aspects that cause some people to recover more quickly than others, and some aspects or characteristics that cause some people to suffer more harm than others when it comes to climate change shocks and stresses. Now, we're going to focus on gender, stakeholders, and inclusion in this module. The specific focus is gender equality and social inclusion. You'll see also that I use the acronym gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. These two acronyms mean the same thing. With the GCF, you'll see GEDSI, gender equality and social inclusion. I personally like to add the D for disability because of some experiences that I've had in my professional career. So you'll often hear me use the term GEDSI, but it means the same thing essentially as GEDSI, gender equality and social inclusion. Now, it's a little bit difficult in a module series like this where we're taking a step-by-step approach to developing your project concept to talk about gender equality and disability and social inclusiveness. That's because GEDSI or GEDSI is not a single separate step in the project design process. Rather, it is a consideration that we incorporate into every step in the project design process or in designing our concept note. So that means that we don't think of GEDSI or gender equality and social inclusion at a particular step along the way, but we're thinking about it all along the journey to developing a concept note. This means from the very beginning, when we're thinking about the topic for our concept note, until the end. Now, if you treat gender equality and social inclusiveness as a separate step, then it will seem like it's grafted on or it's bolted onto your project as an afterthought, and we want to avoid this. We want to mainstream it into our project design process. And so it's not a discrete step. Remember that it's a process of mainstreaming. It's something you mainstream into your project design from the outset. Now, this is extremely important, gender equality and social inclusiveness, for at least two reasons. The first reason that I always think about is the practical reason. The practical reason. This has to do with your wallet, with your bank account. And this is because all financiers, from the largest financiers, from the biggest projects that are funded by the banks, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, from the largest projects that they fund, all the way down to the smallest climate change projects, all funders, all financiers require project proponents, that's you and me, all project proponents, to incorporate gender equality and social inclusion into the project design. So GCF is no different. GCF has policies, and they require that all of their investments, all projects that they fund, incorporate gender equality and social inclusiveness. So the practical reason, the first reason, is that, well, if you want your project to be funded, you must incorporate gender equality and social inclusiveness into the proposal. Otherwise, your project will not be funded. But for me, there's a second reason, and I think it's a much more important reason. It's a deeper reason. Because all of us we get into this business of designing projects, and we're not in this business for the money, but we're in this business to lift people up, to improve lives and livelihoods in our community. And so we understand, as we thought about this earlier, we understand that, well, different people in the community can be affected in different ways by climate change. So in some cases, women may be affected more by climate change than men. These are what we call differential vulnerabilities. That's a fancy way of saying that different people are affected differently. Disabled people may be affected by climate disasters more than non-disabled people. Or people of certain castes, of certain religions or ethnic identifications, recent migrants, refugees, all may be affected differently by climate change. Therefore, if we want our project to provide the maximum benefits to the community, we need to take these considerations, we need to incorporate them into our project design process. If we don't, our project will not achieve all of the good that it could potentially achieve without these considerations. The project just won't be as effective as it could be, and that's our real goal. So our second reason is from the heart. We incorporate these considerations because it's the right thing to do. Now, there are significant inequalities in our world. In virtually every place that you go, there are inequalities. And some of the starkest inequalities are between men and women. So according to data collected by the UN Women, we understand that less than 20% of the world's landholders are women. We also know that women make up more than 2/3 of the world's 800 million illiterate people. We know that men's average wages are higher than women's in both rural and urban areas. Yet women often work longer hours than men due to domestic and home care responsibilities. Now, these socioeconomic factors, which are not related to climate change, they help to shape vulnerability to climate change and disasters for women, making women more vulnerable than men in many contexts. So this is an example of what we're talking about when we use the term differential vulnerability. Sometimes you hear the term socially differentiated vulnerability. And there are all sorts of other socially differentiated or differential vulnerabilities that affect other groups as well. You may think about, let's consider recent migrants to a large city. Now, many of us are familiar with large cities where recent migrants move into the city from the countryside. And they come for a variety of reasons, for economic opportunities or many reasons. But in general, these economic migrants, when they move to the city, they do not have very many resources, and we find that they often settle in informal settlements. And these informal settlements are often in vulnerable areas. They may be built over the water or in a river plain or on a steep hill slope that is susceptible to landslides. When we think about climate change, it's these geographic areas within the city that can be more vulnerable to climate change related disasters. Now, these recent migrants, they're more vulnerable, number one, because they live in these places. But number two, they may be more vulnerable because they're not used to how a disaster affects the city. They don't know evacuation routes. They may not know how to access relief supplies. And because in many cases they're poor, they may not have the same access to social services, and they may be underrepresented politically. And so there are a number of reasons why recent migrants may be more vulnerable to climate change disasters. But in other cases also, we think about people of different castes, or in certain circumstances, people of different ethnicities. They may not have access to the same level of services as people from higher castes or people from other ethnicities. So in many cases, a history of socioeconomic discrimination may contribute to increased vulnerabilities. Now, GCF has requirements for gender mainstreaming and gender and social inclusion. And they're going to tell you about their gender policies, and they've been kind enough to make a video, especially for this course, to describe their gender policies. And we will walk through their gender policy very carefully in the presentation. But the important thing to know is that projects have to proactively address gender. That means that they need to incorporate activities that address gender inequalities. Now, in your concept note, you need 3 key elements: gender analysis, gender actions, and gender-sensitive monitoring and evaluation. And we will cover all of these in this module. And we will focus primarily on the gender analysis because this is the most important aspect when it comes to a concept note. So when we focus on the gender analysis or the GEDSI analysis or the GEDSI analysis, we're looking at gender, we're looking at people that can be marginalized, we're looking at disabled people, we're looking at any groups that may be underrepresented or may experience socially differentiated vulnerabilities, or differential vulnerabilities. And we think about certain background factors that we'll go over in this module. But these background factors, they exist before climate change impacts. So we're thinking about things such as the division of labor, especially between men and women. As you probably know, women are more likely in many cases to be employed in the informal sector than men. Men are more likely to have formal sector employment. So we look at the division of labor in the employment sector, but also in the household. We'll look at economic roles that men and women play. We'll also look at men and women's roles in power and decision-making processes and their access to information. And so all of these factors in our GEDSI analysis, they'll help you to describe how climate change affects different groups differently. Because these background contextual factors, they shape the impacts of climate change. And we'll also we'll show you how to bring this out in your concept note. So that's it for this introductory video. I want to thank you for your kind attention. Make sure that you watch the GCF video because they tell you exactly what the GCF expects when it comes to gender equality and social inclusiveness. Do the presentation, the self-guided module, and it will work you through the steps that you need to take, the process of incorporating GEDSI into your own concept note. And we'll show you the entry points and we'll give you some examples from successful concept notes that have been approved by the GCF. Do the exercises, and last but not least, check out the links and the resources that are included with the module. That's it. Thank you, and I'll see you in Module 4. Goodbye.